question, ask him about her expertise. So thank you Pak Maurice ya. Ya, teman-teman yang baik, jadi Pak Maurice ini akan mengajarkan khusus soal comparative studies ya, comparative studies. Seperti yang teman-teman tahu bahwa Magister Ilmu Hukum, LLM program, dan beberapa mata kuliah ya, hukum itu di Fakultas Hukum UGM itu sudah mulai mengintroduce tentang comparative study dalam berbagai aspek. Jadi ini menjadi sangat penting bagi kita untuk belajar lebih lanjut, dan saya berharap teman-teman ya selama ini kan kalau di kelas rodok malu-maluin karena aktif, enggak dong ya. Tapi di sini jangan malu-maluin, nggak nanya ya. Jadi mohon seaktif mungkin untuk menggali berbagai materi ya, supaya kita mendapatkan pembelajaran yang lebih banyak dan lebih efektif ya. A course will be given by English, but if you have any question, you can use bahasa. Here there is Bu Aci, Bu Tita, Mas Davi, and me. We love to translate it into English if you want to do so ya, for the question only. Kita mendapatkan pembelajaran yang lebih banyak dan lebih efektif. Let's give applause. Of course will be given by English, but if you have any question, you can use bahasa. Here there is Bu Aci, Bu Tita, Mas Davi, and me. We love to translate it into English if you want to do so ya, for the question only. Kita mendapatkan pembelajaran yang So today,
yes, thank you very much for your
course will be given by English, but
thank you very much for being able to be
use bahasa.
Today with you
Here
all.
there is Bu Aci, Bu Tita, Mas Davi, and me.
Thank you very much.
We love to
translate
it into
English
English.
School. And thank you for being the host, of course. I would also like to express
today,
yes, thank you very much for your
course will be given by English, but
thank you very much to be today with you, Dian, Rosita Wati. You are my host, but they are my hosts in Indonesia, and they are very helpful in organizing this trip. And maybe some of you know, maybe you don't know, and if you don't know, I'm going to tell you now. Both Davi and Tita graduated, both presented their doctoral dissertations actually at Tilburg University just 2 or 3 months ago, the 16th of December, wasn't it? It's in our memory. So a few weeks before Christmas, and I had the enormous honor to be one of their supervisors, doctoral supervisors, together with my colleague in Tilburg, Professor Mark Lott. But thank you again, the two of you, for organizing my trip here again. In any event, what am I going to talk about to you today? Maybe I should start by pointing out that as an academic, I'm doing research on fundamentals, foundations of public law, legal theory, if you like, but especially foundations of public law and constitutional law. Usually, we were talking about yesterday evening during dinner, so the exercise of public power confronts me with my identity as a lawyer. So who am I as a legal academic? And what does it mean to be a legal academic? What are its possibilities, opportunities, and what are its limitations? And I suppose that my talk today, which I also presented in UI, your colleagues at UI and at University and at Bandung, the Faculty of Law there. I mean, it's a really relevant question. And in a way, I would say law as a legal discipline is in a sort of identity crisis, if you like. That's a strong word, isn't it? Just to stir up the discussion later on. But I think the legal discipline is in a way in an identity crisis, because it's shifting from an interpretative discipline to what you might call more of a social science discipline. But if it's a social science discipline, the question is, of course, yeah, so what is then the legal aspect of it and how does it integrate? Anyway, this is actually, after giving now this talk for the third time, I think this is actually the bottom line of discussion in this talk, with a focus on comparative law. I am actually working on the beginning, you might say, of an article on the relationship between comparative law and interdisciplinarity. And it's actually the introductory chapter of a book on comparative law and the disciplines. It's provisionally titled, and I'm grateful actually for the possibility to test some of my embryonic ideas here today. The title of my presentation is a bit awkward, of course. So why would one want to question or challenge a discipline, comparative law that is, for being, well, a legal discipline? Comparative law being a legal discipline. Why would one want to challenge comparative law as a legal discipline? Now, let me therefore start with a quote. I hope it works. Can you read it? Yes, you can, I think. Yeah. Let me therefore start with a quote. One of the key areas of debate and also confusion among modern comparative lawyers is the relationship between legal and other approaches. Interdisciplinary research is in the heart of comparative law today. However, even while there seems to be a relatively broad agreement on the need to embrace interdisciplinarity as such, there is no settled agreement on what comparative law actually is kind of a discipline. So of course this last sentence, this last element of this quote I'm focusing on, and this was a quote by a colleague of mine with whom I've been working with in recent years actually. Jaakko Husa is his name, Finnish colleague, teaching now I think at teaching now since recently at the University of Helsinki. And I agree with him. Husa is right, I think, because interesting comparative law in any event calls for some kind of interdisciplinarity and for heightening knowledge or methods from other disciplinary perspectives. But that statement, of course, provokes all kinds of questions. To mention but two, so what makes me a legal scholar then, as a comparatist? If comparative law is by nature interdisciplinarity, why am I a legal scholar? Why can I justifiably be called a professor of law and not, say, a professor of anthropology? Or maybe better, under what conditions can comparative law still be called a legal discipline? So these are the central questions I will try and deal with today. Now, since 2011, I will be speaking for about 50 minutes, I guess, maybe an hour. Since 2011, I've been teaching a course on comparative legal research. Maybe it's more of a seminar. It's a seminar-like setting, you know, with interactivity, question and debate. But it's a seminar on comparative legal methodology for master and PhD students at both Tilburg University in the Netherlands and Leuven University in Belgium. And in teaching this seminar, I developed a sense of unease with a branch of scholarship, comparative law that is, in which much of the most influential work on comparative method remains at the level of pure theory. So pure theory, omitting sustained testing, any sustained testing of its critiques and recommendation in practice. So I just told you, if you have sleepless nights, read a book on methodology. Usually it's completely abstract. And this is one of the problems with comparative legal methodology. If you teach a course on that, it's very difficult to find literature that really lives up, so to say, lightens up the material. So that's not boring anymore or abstract, but becomes specific and concrete. Now, here's an interesting example from my own work, so which I partly did with Jaco Husa, whom we just quoted. So this is a two-volume book, and the three of us have been working on that for quite some years. It's a collection of chapters, an anthology, focusing on comparative legal methodology, which appeared in 2017. Now, the two volumes together consist of 1,600 pages. I mean, that's a lot. Huh? We had the opportunity to use that much pages, or the possibility was offered to us by the publisher, so we seized the chance, the opportunity. But it turned out to be not very easy to find very good chapters that were convincingly able to relate to comparative theory, the comparative theory, also to the practical advice. So we had to do the combination ourselves in a way. So to repeat my point, of course there is literature on comparative legal methodology, but the combination of practice and theory is rather rare. That's my point here. And that is, of course, what I experienced when teaching this seminar, which I just mentioned, to this graduate class at both Tilburg and Leuven universities. So in short, there you are as a lecturer teaching a course on how to actually do comparative law, and it turns out hardly anything available in terms of really helpful literature to your students. Quite a challenge. But there were more challenges I experienced as a lecturer and as a researcher. Because at the same time, and that is quite interesting, so you have hardly any practical advice going on, you know, literature that combines theory with practice. But at the same time, there is quite some interesting, substantive, comparative legal work. Practice. But I thought, well, if there is substantive scholarship, if there is exciting, interesting, rigorous, substantive comparative legal scholarship produced over the past decades, that indicates that there must be methodological awareness, but that awareness that seems to stay under the surface. So as said, I felt somehow uneasy with that situation, and especially with regard to my students, and I cannot stress enough that I am today also and explicitly addressing my talk to you, to aspiring and beginning research students. So there seemed to be room for improvement, and I have myself, in the courses I teach, been working on combining research structure with practice, combining it with theory. That's structure in the sense of dissecting, the different steps a comparative takes when embarking on a comparative research project. and in setting out these steps, providing lots of examples, discussing lots of examples of actual comparative research, and setting it off against the theories involved. You could say it's working from practice to theory rather from theory to practice. It's a kind of bottom-up approach. Now, here is the structure. It looks plain and almost self-evident. How does it look on the screen? Yes, I think you, can you read it? Yes? Okay, thank you. So here's the structure. It looks plain, almost self-evident. And it consists, I think, of the stages that can be found in quite some comparative legal research, regardless of aims and questions, or even public or private law. And it is actually this structure that I use for teaching my course. And within this structure, all kinds of problems and practical challenges are being dealt with, almost always, as I said, by way of giving examples, or by questioning them and by taking them as best practices. So within this framework, topics like countries of comparison, the concept and sources of law you are working with, linguistic challenges are being dealt with. And every choice you make in this regard is, of course, a function of your research question. That should be spot clear from the beginning. So here they are. I identified 10 steps. You might identify 9 yourself, or 11 or 12. That doesn't really matter for my purposes. I think that in any event, these steps can be identified in most, if not all, comparative legal research projects. Identification of the research topic, the formulation of the research question, comparability and choice of systems, identification of the comparative framework, the so-called tertium comparationis, identification of the relevant rules, description of the identified rules, and then listing similarity and differences. And then there's a sort of gap that is deliberately there, of course, I will talk about it later. Then Step 8, the real comparing. Then 9, explaining for the similarities and the differences you found. And then Step 10, possibly a kind of evaluation, if you like. Now, to avoid misunderstandings, and this is important for me to stress, the teaching is structured around this scheme as if, that is, as if, hypothetically, as if comparative law or legal research is a kind of ordered, almost linear activity, top down. That is what the arrow on the right side of the slide depicts. In real life, I do not think research can ever be ordered as it looks here. Doing research, in other words, is not a cookbook. And those of you who do cook a meal once in a while know that following the cookbook recipe exactly doesn't necessarily make for nice meals. So variations are possible. Some of the steps are many times merged and hardly distinguishable, and also the order can be different. And by the time you have finished your research project, you will have to go back to the beginning, as it were, and redesign your initial research question in the light of your findings and what you actually turned out to be able to do. So if research in general, but also comparative legal research, should be depicted, it is not linear, but it is circular. But again, that doesn't matter for my purposes here. What is important here is that identifying these different possible steps a comparatist might take makes it possible for you to identify, for you as a researcher, to make visible what you have done or haven't done. So it's a kind of yardstick, if you like. A yardstick, again, that makes it possible for you to identify what you have or have not been doing. So it also makes you aware, and that is also an important aspect of this scheme, it also makes you aware of the unavoidable limitations of a specific research project. Which ambitions could not be fitted in or could be fitted in? How can my findings or what I have done or not have done, how does that weigh on the scope of the research project? How can it be built on, etc.? So to follow up on this cookbook metaphor, yes, following the recipe exactly doesn't make necessarily for nice meals, but cookbooks can actually give you some guidance. And then it's upon you to decide how to deviate from it or do it differently. When you are cooking a meal, I'm not sure whether the metaphor completely works, but nevertheless it has a function. I think when you are cooking a meal, it's a permanent process of tasting, you know, is it good, is enough salt, should I add some salt, and then you have finished the meal, and then you find out you used too much salt while the meal did not succeed, but if you didn't use enough salt, you can add something, of course. It's a kind of iterative, as they say, process. I will refer back to this scheme later in my talk. So let me now go back to my main question about the disciplinary identity of comparative legal research, and let me give you a simple example from my own research on constitutional culture in the Netherlands and in Belgium. But let me first focus on the Netherlands. The question that was central to a research project I did on constitutional culture in the Netherlands was what role, if any, the Dutch constitution plays in channeling or constraining the political state of affairs in the Netherlands. Now, someone who is not familiar to the political structure and conventions of the Netherlands might be excused for thinking that the written constitution of the Netherlands belongs to the same category as, for example, its German counterpart. And if you read textbooks on comparative constitutional law, you know, the Netherlands, so this northwestern European part of the world is usually combined as a kind of similarity block. You know, there's the constitutionality of Germany, maybe some Scandinavian countries, and the Netherlands is also member of that family or group, if you like. No, I don't agree either, actually. I strongly disagree, actually, but someone is nodding his head. We can talk about that later. I strongly disagree, but that's exactly my point. So if you read the textbook, you might say, well, this is part of the constitutional culture here. Huh? But it would be an enormous exaggeration, actually. Because what is very typical of the Dutch constitution is that it allows the political process very great freedom in developing and regulating constitutional law. So it's actually the other way around, I think. To give you a few examples of the incompleteness of the Dutch constitution, for example, it doesn't include the right to a fair trial. It does not, for example, include the right to life, which you find in many constitutions. Interestingly, I think it states explicitly that limitation to fundamental rights are possible by law without stating under what limiting conditions this can be done. So it's quite true for quite some fundamental rights. It tells us very little on how government is formed. It's about you can find it in constitutional conventions, but they can change easily, and they did change easily a few years ago, actually. And there is no judicial constitutional review, as that is expressly forbidden by Article 120 of the Constitution. So the judicial enforcement mechanism is poorly developed, and these are just a few examples. So I would say that as a result, the Dutch constitution plays hardly any role in political debates in parliament, and seems many times to be ignored or forgotten. There's an interesting quote by a colleague of mine from the University of Amsterdam, and I put it on this PowerPoint. He said, I think it's quite apt, "It is virtually impossible to find any politician in The Hague who would want to win or lose a political debate on the ground that a certain topic would be contravening the Dutch constitution. So, if you would have to typify the Dutch constitution, it would be more as a very general, not very fine-grained guide to the exercise of political power, as opposed to a collection of robust guarantees in the service of rule of law values. So this Dutch constitution doesn't function as a strong ideal document, as for example the German does, I think. And it is rather a codification of political practice than the other way round. So if you have to typify, I would say the Netherlands is marked by a rather sober constitutional culture and by a strong distance between constitution and politics. Let me now come back to the scheme. Here's the scheme again. And to comparative legal work and the structure of it. So what you see many times in comparative studies is that the situation in different countries are studied next to each other. And I think that many comparative studies stop at stage 6 or stage 7. They describe the identified rules, they list some similarities and differences, and that's about it. And as a source of information, I think that is hugely important, no doubt. It's informative. You know, here's Germany, here's the Netherlands, here's the UK. This is how it is here, this is how it is there, and this is how you can find it in the UK, next to each other. So we do have judicial constitutional review in Germany, but not directly in the Netherlands, and there's a kind of in-between situation through review of the Human Rights Act in the UK. Okay, so that's informative, of course. You can learn a lot of lessons from that. Martin Shapiro, an American scholar, and I think that explicit comparison would imply that you also come up with proposals about how these different systems relate to each other. So when a colleague and myself are working on this topic of constitutional culture, we thought it interesting to also include some comparison with Belgium, Germany and the United Kingdom. So if the question would be how the political realm relates to the Constitution, one way of looking at this could be the one you see on the PowerPoint slide here. To be sure, there are, of course, alternative ways of classifying constitutions, but we looked at the normativity. So, on the one hand, on the left-hand side of the continuum, you see a constitution that might be characterized as strict, with strict and rigid rules. That is up to a certain extent, maybe to a large extent, at least true for Belgium, I think. And there are reasons for it. Then you have the Constitution as a normative document. I would say Germany, and up till a few years ago, I would say maybe the US. I'm not sure anymore now, actually, but any event, I think Germany could be characterized as this. And then there's the Constitution as a very loose guideline. The Netherlands, maybe the UK. The comparative aspect here in this scheme is subtle. The difference between stage 7 and 8 is subtle. But you can only call something strict or normative or loose with respect to each other. So comparison means describing, evaluating different systems with an eye to each other and putting it into schemes, to intelligible schemes, to relate them to each other. And now to go back to this quote by Martin Shapiro on top of the PowerPoint, you don't see that many times actually happening in comparative studies, interesting in law. The relationships between the different communities within linguistic communities and economic communities within a federal state. And these communities, they have a tensed relation towards each other. And to try and regulate the tensions, you really strictly have to apply those constitutional rules that relate to these relationships between the communities and the regions. The normativity of the document of Germany, it's a very general explanation, but I think can be, to a large extent, be explained by the atrocities of the experiences of the Second World War, of course. What would it be else? Then you've got the loose guideline idea of the Netherlands and the UK, where there is a long tradition of sovereignty of parliament, I would think. And certainly, what is being explained as being very different in many textbooks, Netherlands is very different from the UK, might well be very similar actually. And that is a result of the real comparison being done in stage 8, rather than stopping, together with Shapiro, in the quote, at stage 7, describing similarities and differences, and not explaining for it, not even relating them to each other. You can, of course, if you want to explain for these similarities and differences, so stage 9 again, in comparative legal studies, I'll go back to the scheme, stage 9 again. If you want to explain for similarities and differences, you can hardly do that by building on the law itself. The law doesn't explain itself. There's something else going on. And I would say, well, then you even have to, then you have to build on political science. What was very helpful for understanding Belgium and the Netherlands for my colleague and myself was actually the political theories of a Dutch-American political scientist, the theories of a Dutch-American political scientist, Arend Leibhardt. World-famous scholar, spending most of his career in the US. It really helps you to come to grips or try to explain why the Netherlands and Belgium are the way they are. So here the interdisciplinarity suddenly comes in. If you want to explain for differences and similarities, if you want to explain why the law is in one country like this when compared to another country like that, you have to build on other disciplines. So there is the interdisciplinarity coming up. Yeah, sure. Okay. Yes.
So we will have kind of like a summary for a while for Indonesians, and then after that, if you have question, but very confirmation question, because we will continue session later on. Okay, so we break for a while for summarize and question for this part, and then we continue after that. Okay, so you might we are still on the stage ya. Okay, teman-teman, jadi Pak Maurice tadi menyatakan bahwa comparative study ini menjadi satu ilmu yang baru dan menjadi penting ya bagi kita untuk melakukan analisis hukum. Oke. Dan yang menjadi menarik bagaimana caranya melakukan satu comparative studies ya. Pak Maurice tadi meletakkan paling tidak ada 10 step. Ya, 10 step yang penting untuk melakukan itu. Nah, ini ada 10 ini ya. Dan yang menjadi penting kalau kita memilih satu komparasi, dia melihat apa keterhubungan dan mengapa kita penting melakukan satu komparasi dengan negara itu. Ya, kadang-kadang menurut Pak Maurice kita bisa melihat bahwa ada pasti kalau komparatif misalnya yang dilihat misalnya pada level 7 itu adalah melihat persamaan dan perbedaan. Ya, persamaan dan perbedaan. Tapi yang menjadi penting, kita harus sebelumnya sudah mengetahui dulu mengapa kita perlu melakukan satu komparatif terhadap negara itu. Sebelum nanti akan menjadi melihat dan menganalisis persamaan dan perbedaannya. Oke, ini masih ke sana ya. Nanti kita lanjutkan lagi ke yang lain. Nah, contoh yang barusan diberikan oleh Pak Maurice adalah ketika melakukan comparative studies untuk melihat konstitusi, ya, konstitusi yang di Jerman tadi dengan Belanda dan kemudian ini dengan Belgia. Nah, itu adalah contoh bagaimana Pak Maurice melakukan komparasi. Yang menarik juga dia bilang dulu dikiranya ada perbedaan, ternyata ketika melakukan analisis komparasi malah ada persamaan-persamaannya. Oke, sampai di situ udah bisa ngikutin ya. Oke, ada pertanyaan dulu untuk ini. Oke, so yes please. Yeah, you can stand up.
Thank you, Mr. Professor, for the presentation. I have a question. So one of the structure, the number 4, it's identification of comparative framework or test yung comparationist. In order to compare, we should not look at a foreign legal system with our eyes of our own legal system. And as a student, I find it kind of difficult. So my question is, how can we transcend it by using external or neutral elements for comparing legal systems?
Great. So what's the name first?
Safety.
Yeah, Septi. Thank you, Septi. Only 2 questions, yeah, because Pak Maurice will continue his lecture, yeah, and then mackling with the question that come from you. So, do you have any more question? Yes, please.
Saya bahasa Indonesia aja.
Iya, nanti Bu.
Oh, jadi pertanyaan saya langsung aja. Ketika kita melakukan komparasi hukum, kan ditemukan adanya kesamaan dan perbedaan. Nah, bagaimana caranya menentukan kesamaan perbedaan itu apple to apple terhadap negara yang kita komparasi? Saya kadang bukan seperti yang kasusnya sekarang ya, yang tentang omnibus law. Kan itu kan lebih diterapkan di Kanada yang sebetulnya common law. Sedangkan kita ada civil law. Nah, itu kan menurut saya itu kurang apple to apple. Nah, bagaimana cara menentukan apple to apple supaya komparatif law itu tidak legal iritan. Jadi kayak ketika kita mengadaptasikan ke hukum nasional kita tidak legal iritan. Jadi tidak sesuai lah, pokoknya sesuai lah terhadap hukum kita.
The question is actually, I heard the omnibus law passing by,
Yeah.
so can't prevent it.
When doing comparative law and decided that the differences and the same with the subject that has been compared, how you decide if it is apple to apple or comparable between the two systems. For example, she mentioned about omnibus law. When we compare Indonesian omnibus law with Canadian, she feel that is it apple to apple because Indonesia has a civil law system while Canada has a comparative.
I only get 2 questions because we still need to hear from Pak Maurice, yeah, to continue his lecture. Yes.
Yeah, thank you for these are very good questions actually, and one of them I also had at UI. I think the first one is about. These are actually questions you could ask after the lecture, but I will not go into detail in the remainder of the lecture. But nevertheless, so the question about how can you be neutral as a comparatist? Well, the answer is you cannot. It's impossible. Of course, you cannot escape yourself. How could one escape one's identity, which is culturally rooted, deeply culturally rooted? So I never say, like some functionalists, so-called functionalist comparative scholars, the most famous example are the Germans Zweigert and Kutz, that neutrality is possible, but it's something to reach for. So you can try and be as semi-objective as possible. And that implies 2 things. I've got a practical advice, and it's a strategic advice. There's a metaphor I use for when doing comparative law, which might be helpful in I'll stick that for the second question, actually. I'm improvising. So going back to my point, you should strive for neutrality and be permanently aware of your cultural rootedness. That is of the utmost importance. And then, as with all research projects, I mean, the result is not perfect. It's a contribution to an ongoing debate. And maybe someone doing the same type of research project than you are doing after you are doing will come to different conclusions. Well, that is academia, you know, that is what research is about, discussion and debate. Never call it neutral, but be aware of your cultural rootedness. This is what is the most important thing, I think. So it's something, it's an aspiration. Neutrality is an aspiration. It's not a reality, it's an ideal to strive for, and you being conscious that you will never reach that ideal. But you can try as much as possible to get rid of your own presuppositions. Then this question about differences or similarities, so what yardstick do you use there? So how to measure them? Where are you? There it is, yes. How do you measure similarities? And there it's kind of a similar question, or it tunes in with your question. Well, it depends. There is no objective sense of similarity or differences in law. It depends on your research question. It depends on what you are looking for or what you want to know. And now, because now my metaphor comes in, which I wanted to answer to the first your colleague who asked the first question, and the metaphor is of the binocular. So, what do you do when you do comparative legal research? So, the metaphor binocular means, you know, you've got these binoculars. And what you do when you put the binoculars on your eyes is like permanently adjusting. So yesterday afternoon I had an afternoon off. I went to the Borobudur. Of course, I had to go to the Borobudur. So imagine you're using the binoculars at the Borobudur. So if you want to see the details of the Borobudur, then you have to adjust them like this. That's what you're looking for. If you want to see the mountains surrounding the Borobudur, you have to adjust your binoculars again. And comparative law, in a way, doing comparative legal research is exactly this. It's a permanent matter of looking for similarity from a distance. There are constitutional courts in Spain, in Belgium, in Germany. That is a similarity. But if you look close, it's just difference. If you look, for example, at the competences of the Spanish court, or the competences of the Belgian court, and the competence of the German Bundesverfassungsgericht, the local constitutional court, you see that they have different functions and different competences. So if you're looking at the competences, you look at the differences. If you look at constitutional courts in more general, from a different angle, you might be looking for similarities. So the point is, it depends on what you want to know and what you're looking at. So what are you interested in the mountains or in the Borobudur? In the design of institutional design within a larger institutional structure, or the competences. Having said that, every comparative study, I'm convinced, begins with some sort of similarity. Some sort of perceived similarity. If there's no perceived similarity, you can't compare. But having said that, you can compare almost everything. You know, there's this famous saying, here, apples and oranges cannot be compared. You find that saying in quite some languages with different types of fruit. In South America, I understand it's naranjas and bananas. So pisangs and oranges. I'm not sure what it is here in Indonesia, but in the Netherlands it's apples and oranges. So they cannot be compared. Well, they can be compared. It's both fruit. Of course they can be compared, but it depends on what you are looking for. If I go to the grocery store on Saturday morning and I have to decide what fruit I'm going to buy for the week to come, my point of entry of comparison will be fruit and how fresh it is. So the pisangs are a bit old, black. We don't like them in the Netherlands if they are black. They are the nicest when they are black, but nevertheless we don't like them, and they have to be yellow. So I'll pick the yellow bananas as opposed to the apples which are not hard anymore because they are too old. So my point of entry is freshness. If I'm a scientist and I want to make a classification of types of fruit in terms of the fruit meat, and I want to classify fruit with hard meat and not soft meat, well, leave out the oranges and include pears and apples and what can you think of here in Indonesia. So the point here, what is similar or different is a function of your research question and what you have to know, and then you have to decide what is a similarity for you and what is not a similarity for you. The idea of these binoculars is that if you push them wide, you see a lot of similarity. The mountains in Spain look the same like the mountains, for example, from a very large distance, like the ones in Eastern Java. But if you look close, it's completely different, of course. And for me, this binocular metaphor is really very relevant for tuning in on what you really want to know. So the research process is using these binoculars permanently. Okay, what I'm looking for, adjusting, and then suddenly you end up at the point where you want to be. This is what I'm looking for, and this is how I look. Then culture comes in. It might be, if you look at the Constitutional Court in Spain from the perspective of competences, and then you go to Germany, that you slightly have to adjust your binoculars again. So this iterative, as they call it, this circular process permanently. I hope I've been clear enough now with the metaphor. Yeah.
So?
Okay. Okay. I thought you want to. Yeah.
No,
thank you. Okay.
Only 2 questions.
Only 2
Trigger
questions.
them
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get interested in.
So my main point up till now was when you enter this stage 7 or 8. Let's go back to the stages again because it fulfills a function in my story. If you enter, stage 7 or then 8, especially 8 and 9, especially 9 actually, there is interdisciplinarity going on. Now here's a quote by John Bell. There are peculiar challenges in comparative legal research. One of them is to understand the full institutional setting out of which the legal issues and solutions arise, the organization of the legal systems, its legal concepts, presuppositions, and mental map of the relationship between legal institutions, its legal procedures, and the broader social and cultural context and assumptions. Tunes in with the first question, actually. Yeah. So you have to identify the cultural assumptions is the main point here. And here it comes. And this is a very interesting quote, actually. So if you do that from your own legal system, this is kind of tacit knowledge. You know, it comes, it's there. You're not even aware of it. And this is why I told to you, doing comparative law also means to become aware of your own presuppositions. You know, this awareness is of huge importance. It's tacit knowledge. You'll be taught in this tacit knowledge actually from the first year of your legal studies, and it's in the back of your head, not consciously on top of your head. It's just there. And when you interpret your own law, when you're trying to understand, you know what the meaning, you think you know what the meaning is of your own law, then it's always infused with all kinds of cultural assumptions of which you are unaware of. John Bell says, if you do comparative law, you have to make this tacit knowledge, this implicit knowledge, you have to make that explicit. That is the awareness I was talking about. You have to be aware of this implicit knowledge and make it explicit. So to return to the scheme again, if this is right, then the interdisciplinarity is not just at stage 8, it's even there in stage 6 or 7. Because, why is that? Describing, I called it the description of the identified rules to be compared. A description is always an interpretation, of course. If you describe something, there's some interpretation going on. You describe the identified rules from your own cultural assumptions. And being aware of those cultural assumptions is some sense of interdisciplinarity again. So it's not just explaining for the similarities and differences, which calls for building on other disciplines than the legal disciplines. Even describing different legal systems next to each other forces you to make the cultural assumptions explicit, which is not a typically legal thing, I would say. So I would call it some sense of interdisciplinarity. And then I would say there's even the third level of interdisciplinarity, if you like. That is step 10. So you have the findings. You list the similarities and the differences. Let's say you skip stage 8 and 9, you could, I suppose, and say, well, I want to evaluate what I'm seeing. Evaluate with regard to what? Its efficiency, the ethical aspects, you build on other disciplines usually to evaluate, unless you choose to evaluate the systematic aspects of the law. That now is a typically legal thing, I would say. But mostly evaluation means evaluation based on, well, some kind of set of criteria which do not come from the law itself. So what we have identified now is stage 9, you explain for similarities and differences and do that with regard to another discipline which is not legal. You describe stage 6, the rules you identified which you want to compare later on, and you have to make the cultural assumptions, the implicit cultural assumptions, explicit, which is not a typically legal thing. And if you really want to evaluate, you don't have to, I think, but if you really want to evaluate your findings, well, it's an evaluation with regard to something, which is usually not law. So here we are. Law is a fundamentally, in a way you could look at it, comparative law especially, as a fundamental social science, rather than just an interpretive activity. Now I was asking if there was a possibility for using the whiteboard here. Now this of course provokes another type of discussion which I would like to spend a little bit time on, some 10 minutes still. That is, okay, here we are. We are comparative lawyers. Actually, we are lawyers. Because what I'm talking about is not just true for comparative law, but I think it's true for legal research in general. So there are levels of interdisciplinarity. And I think you can identify at least 3, maybe 4 or 5 if you like, but I would, for the sake of discussion here, identify at least 3. If lawyers talk about interdisciplinarity, they hardly ever say what they mean by it. And I think it's important at least to identify stages of interdisciplinarity. Now, I identify 3 stages. It's a kind of depiction I used for the first time a few weeks ago at UI, but I think it's useful and helpful for the debate. The first is the typical, what we call legal research. So let me just use this abbreviation, typically legal dogmatic research. So what is legal dogmatic research? You know, we lawyers are dealing with text materials, that is either case law. The Supreme Court came up with a ruling. What does it mean? We study the text and we interpret the text, or it's codification, legislation. The legislator came up with a text and we are studying the text. What is very typical of that is that it is a backward-looking activity. You interpret material from the past and try to understand what someone in the past was trying to convey. So what was it the Supreme Court was trying to convey? What was it the legislator intended to do? So it's a kind of backward-looking activity, very interpretative. But lawyers, so this is this is actually what is the traditional legal discipline, I think. So interpreting text. So you have a research question, which is typically legal, usually looks then as a result on whether or not the law is systematic or not. This is hugely important. My point is not, it is not important, it is hugely important. And it's very typical of legal research. And then you see, this is kind of, I'm not sure what it is actually, but it doesn't spread out in any event, that's the idea here. It's a legal research question. So what is the law? What is the meaning of the law dealing with bankruptcy, for example? And then you see that the research is usually a systemizing activity, trying to develop, trying to find out whether the law is coherent, whether the Supreme Court came up with a coherent ruling, which fits the system of the law. And then there's an answer to the research question that follows almost directly from this type of research. Then you've got I'm sorry, yes. Then you've got again a research question which is legal research question. The research project actually brings in a certain type of knowledge from other disciplines. The aim, however, is not to develop the other disciplines, but to use knowledge from other disciplines to try and understand what is going on. So the example of Dutch and Belgian constitutionalism, which I gave previously, was building on political science. So in order to understand what was going on, the rules and regulations, why they were as they were in the Netherlands and Belgium, we used political theory by Arend Leijpaard, the Dutch-American political scientist. But our aim was to come up with legal answers to a more or less legal research question that is telling something about the design of constitutions. So the other discipline was not used constructively. So we had to use it to be able to answer the research question, but it was not our aim to develop political science. Might be a spring-off, you never know, but it was not our aim. Our aim was to answer a legal research question, and here was the answer. So, yeah, that's being depicted in this somehow circular picture here. And then you've got the really multidisciplinary research, which I depict like this. There are many urgent questions, societal urgent questions at this moment, dealing with climate, with criminality, with migration, with water, with health, especially health today, of course, with traffic, with whatever you can think of, problems that arise almost everywhere in the world, and if we want to solve them, you cannot do it just by law. You need to collaborate with other people. You know, these are big research projects where you use economics, you use possibly philosophy or ethics, you use psychology if you like. If you want to do the nudging thing, you use history, historical analysis, you use law. What you see here is that law is just one variable amongst each other. So that's really the multidisciplinary thing. In a way, you could say these are stages of interdisciplinarity. You can identify if there are variations. There are variations possible, of course. You can identify some more possibilities, I would say. But for the discussion, I would say these three can do the thing. My point now is, what does it mean to do comparative law? I think if you want to do comparative, and this is a bit of a strategic question more than anything else. From a pragmatic point of view, it's not a principal point of view, I would advise lawyers to go either for the first or the second option. So why is that? Because you have to be aware of your disciplinary identity. That's what I started with, isn't it? So why I'm so fascinated by these methodological questions, because they confront me with my disciplinary identity. So I would say if you want to do legal research or comparative legal research, which really confronts you with this scheme, I would say either go for deliberately for the first, for the picture on the right hand side, or the one on the left hand side. The middle thing is for universities to develop interdisciplinary research projects, strategic research projects, to invest in, to try and foster collaboration. But it is enormously complicated and difficult, because then we have to find a kind of common language to be able to communicate with each other. And in practice that turns out to be very, very complicated. We've got some experience with that actually at the university where I'm teaching, at Tilburg University. And so quite some colleagues of mine try to collaborate with economists. They have a different vocabulary. They talk mathematics nowadays. Not normativity anymore, they talk mathematics. And it turns out to be extremely complicated to combine these different disciplines and perspectives. It's not impossible, of course. This is how new disciplines emerge in a way. But it takes time, and it takes huge investments, I think, from modern research institutions. In any event, the more extensive the input of the non-legal discipline, the more potential problems there will be for the legal scholar, who is most of the time simply not trained in the social or empirical sciences. So if you want to do the type of interdisciplinary of that sort, what you should be able to do, and is really worthwhile and is also possible, is at least try to understand the information that comes from sociology. So not developing the other discipline, but trying to build on the other discipline. Use that knowledge rather than something else. Not do it yourself, but use it. There's an example from a research project I did myself, and which was finished more than 10 years ago already, on regulating the end of life, the legal regulation of the end of life, but was actually a big interdisciplinary research project. All kinds of sociological, empirical information was being used in that. We didn't do the empirics ourselves. As it happened, the Dutch and Belgian government spent millions of euros on research exactly on this. And what we could do is build on that research. And there was a sociologist in the team. It was an interdisciplinary team of 3 persons, and there was a sociologist on it. And he was able to work on these materials. So the more interdisciplinarity you use, the more it's a cry, it's a plea for collaboration and of being aware what your possibilities, limitations and possibilities and contribution can be as a legal scholar. And this is, I think, the biggest challenge. And I think that modern research universities should think more thoroughly about what conditions, under what conditions or circumstances they want to invest in this type of research. I think I'll leave it to that for today. Yes, thank you.
Oke, saya coba sedikit menggarisbawahi ya apa-apa yang disampaikan oleh Pak Maurice. Ini menarik ya. Jadi tadi sudah menceritakan tentang 10 tahapan ya dalam melakukan komparatif. Sambil tadi menjawab pertanyaan 2 mahasiswi yang bertanya sebetulnya komparatif itu didasarkan pada apa ya. Nah, jadi Pak Maurice bilang kalau kita mau komparatif itu sangat tergantung dari kita. Kita mau apa yang kita komparasi ya. Tadi contohnya dengan menggunakan kacamata toh. Itu sama-sama gunung, apanya yang mau kita lihat? Itu sama-sama buah, apanya yang kita lihat? Jadi kita sendiri harus mempertajam apa yang mau kita temukan dalam komparasi itu, ya. Nah itu yang menjadi penting. Terus yang kedua, selanjutnya Pak Maurice juga menceritakan kalau dalam penelitian hukum komparatif itu sebetulnya ada beberapa pola ya. Pola yang pertama itu yang kita sering kenal dengan doktrinal atau normatif. Jadi yang dikomparasi itu di dalam sistem itunya sendiri. Misalnya apakah ini hukumnya, apakah ini asasnya, itu satu hal, apakah peraturannya, atau kita mau komparasi putusan-putusannya ya. Nah, itu juga bisa antar satu putusan dengan putusan yang lain misalnya. Itu di dalam satu lingkup yang namanya normatif ya, legal normative research. Kita biasa banyak juga yang melakukan itu. Tapi yang kedua itu tadi kadang-kadang kita tidak bisa hanya komparasi dengan menggunakan ilmu hukum. Nah, kita harus meminjam pendekatan lain. Misalnya pendekatan sosiologi. Misalnya tadi yang dicontohkan adalah melihat ini dasar dari pembentukan konstitusi ini apa gitu ya. Di baliknya itu apa, dalam konteks politik yang seperti apa. Nah itu artinya kita pinjam pengetahuan politik untuk mempertajam kita dalam melakukan penelitian hukum. Nah itu yang tahap kedua. Yang tahap ketiga ini lebih multidisiplin. Jadi itu adalah proyek besar yang ada pendekatan hukum, ada pendekatan sosiologi, ada pendekatan ekonomik, yang biasanya komparatif juga dibutuhkan, tapi dia dalam kerangka penelitian yang untuk melihat permasalahan-permasalahan yang lebih kompleks. Nah, jadi tadi Pak Maurice juga, kalau kita bicara penelitian hukum untuk para mahasiswa, setidaknya 2 ini lebih visible untuk dilakukan. Visibelnya kenapa? Karena kalau kita mau pakai yang ketiga ini membutuhkan kapasitas yang luar biasa. Jadi artinya apakah kita juga belajar tentang ekonomi, apakah kita belajar tentang sosiologi, ataukah kita belajar tentang politik sehingga kita mampu melakukan ini. Nah, jadi Pak Maurice bilang itu sangat tergantung dari fakultas dan universitas sendiri mau menginvest metode penelitian komparatif yang seperti apa dikaitkan dengan penelitian yang besar. Nah, saya kira ini menarik ya. Nah, Magister Ilmu Hukum sendiri itu sebetulnya di sini dimungkinkan, tapi di sini juga dimungkinkan. Tadi Pak Maurice bilang kalau penelitian yang ketiga ini itu biasanya di level yang universitas. Nah, level fakultas itu mungkin tidak terlalu kompleks dulu, ya. Nah, sampai di situ Pak Maurice berhenti dan kemudian bertanya sebetulnya teman-teman apakah ada yang dipertanyakan? Ya, 1, 2 dulu silahkan. Memperkenalkan diri ya.
Baik, sebelumnya terima kasih buat kesempatan. Perkenalkan, nama saya Donald Mamusong dari Prodi Magister Ilmu Hukum Klaster Pidana. Mungkin saya tidak terlalu mencampuri teknis. Pertama bahwa saya harus mendahului dengan minta maaf karena saya datangnya agak terlambat. Jadi mungkin ada beberapa poin penting yang mungkin saja sudah disampaikan tetapi saya tidak mengetahui itu. Nah, sepengetahuan saya kalau tidak keliru bicara soal comparative law atau droit compare dalam bahasa Prancis bukan sesuatu yang baru. Sepengetahuan saya itu berkembang di Eropa daratan sekitar abad 18 dan abad 19 yang notabene sebelumnya dilakukan secara mandiri atau perorangan. Kemudian berkembang di sekitar tahun 1800-an sampai tahun 1900-an. Kajian itu dilakukan atau terbentuk dalam suatu kelembagaan. Sampai dengan hari ini masih ada perdebatan apakah comparative law atau droit compare ini adalah sebuah metode ataukah cabang ilmu dari sistem hukum itu sendiri. Nah, pertanyaan saya sangat sederhana. Menurut Prof. Maurice dan buat Bu Ii, apakah comparative law ini metode ataukah cabang ilmu sekaligus disiplin ilmu? Itu yang pertama. Lalu yang kedua, apa pentingnya membedakan comparative law ini sebagai metode atau cabang ilmu? Kemudian yang ketiga, konsekuensinya apa kalau kita menganggap itu adalah metode atau cabang ilmu? Saya pikir itu saja. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih. Nanti dikumpul ya? Atau mau dijadi? Oh, translate dulu. Boleh dikasih ke Bu Tita? Ya.
First, he apologized for being late because maybe there are some information that he was not informed because of being late. The question is that first he mentioned about comparative law is not something new. It has been developed in Europe since the 19th century. So it has been done by individual or by a group, but there are still debate whether comparative law is a discipline or method. The question is, first, is comparative law is a method or a discipline? The second one, how to differentiate between comparative law as a method and comparative law as a discipline? And the third one is, what are the consequences of having comparative law as a method or a discipline?
Thank you, Bu Tita. So next to the other student, Richard? Yeah. So would you mind to pass on the mic? Yeah.
Thank you. William Morgan, Prof. It is just more practical questions. First, and pragmatic questions.
Please introduce yourself first.
So sorry. My name is Richard from Master of Legal Science program, second semester. Just having a short discussions last night with my friends who are now studying in the IISS Den Haag, majoring for gender and conflict studies, focusing on the youth and children protections, and we are discussing about my interest of studies of the protections of crime by the digital, the protections of victims by the digital crimes. It is, I think, more interesting to discuss with him rather than with my friends who are now also studying international human rights in Tilburg University. But so my questions is, for the sake of the future development of, let's say, Indonesian's legal systems, both in cultural, structural, and substance, my questions is it legal research by comparing different legal system is more relevant than having a legal research by comparing other legal studies out of legal studies? So it is more relevant to have more research, legal research, by comparing one legal system to another legal systems, or one legal studies with another studies out of legal studies. My second question, this is more personal. I have a plan I'm now preparing my applications for taking my LLM in the United States after getting graduated from this university. So do you have any piece of advice? Should I rethink to change my plan to get LLM or another master's in maybe political studies or social studies to deepen my research interest on the protections of victims, the development of digital crimes, the development of Indonesian's criminal law systems, and having more in the discussions of, because I want to be an academician, so what is your advice, the best advice for me to this plan? Thank you very much. Bedankt.
After this session, we have about 30 minutes to have, kind of loose discussion if you need to, right? Before 11:30. So for the personal, kind of interest, it will open because perhaps they have a program that you can attend later on. So why not? I think we also asked Pak Maurice to share about the possibility to, kind of a scholarship or internship or kind of double degrees later on. Okay, all right. So, but before that, I just want to ask you, how many of you are being studying by using comparative approach, the method? Come on, I know some of you. Don't be ashamed. Hello, yes, one. Shafira, I think you are. Yeah, about chat, right? Yeah. Who else? Only two? I don't believe you guys. I don't believe you because I know some of you also. Yeah, three. Who else? So we always, especially for international program, right? We always encourage you to do research on other countries' legal system, right? So even in Magister Ilmu Hukum, Magister Social Science, we have comparative agrarian comparative law. We have criminal comparative law, particular in Asian context, and then we have also the banking, comparative banking law, or also Islamic comparative law. So how, I think this is very important question from Pak Donald. Yeah. So okay, now I give you time to answer the question.
Donald it was, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Donald. It's not an easy question actually you're asking, but there's of course there's some reflection on that possible. Is it a method or is it a discipline? Let's go back to the scheme here. I think it's a discipline if you look at the right part of the whiteboard here. It's a legal discipline there, this is what we do. But be aware that at stage 6, to come back to the PowerPoint, so describing, cultural assumptions have to be lifted, because otherwise you go wrong in understanding the rules of this different legal system. So interdisciplinarity is somehow unavoidable. That's one thing. But we've been doing that for years already, and we do it quite well, I think. I think comparative law is a legal discipline proper, in the old-fashioned, maybe true meaning of the word. But comparative law is now explicitly changing from a legal discipline dealing with interpreting text, part of the humanities, you might say. Very similar, I think, to theology. Well, you interpret the Quran or the Bible. It's text. What does it mean? Both are authoritative texts. legal texts are authoritative as well as our religious texts. So it's very similar to what some theologians do. But it's developing into from a science in the humanities to a social science. And then your question becomes particularly interesting and important. It's developing into the social sciences. Is it a discipline? Well, it's many disciplines. It depends on what part of social science you're building on. If you're using sociology, then it's the discipline of sociology that is dominantly available or present. If you're building on economics, because you are comparatively, for example, in measuring effectiveness of legal rules, you have to know the legal rules. You have to understand the legal rules. You have to do the legal thing. And you have to know or understand at least a bit of the economics. There it's the economic discipline. So it's many disciplines depending on the angle. And it might be, but it's always predicting, there's this saying, I think by Niels Bohr, a famous physicist in the beginning of the 20th century, he said, prediction is difficult, especially concerning the future. Well, of course he's right, but it might well be that it's developing into its own discipline, comparative law. But it's not that stage yet. As far as it is now, so I'm not sure how it will work out within decades or so, as it is now. It's many disciplines depending on what discipline you're building on to explain similarities and differences, or even do the evaluation thing. Yeah, what are the consequences was one of your questions. If it's another discipline, well, the consequence is that you have to be able to work with the other discipline. You don't have to, as an academic, as far as I'm concerned, you don't have to develop the other discipline, but you have to be able to work with it. You have to recognize the methodological problems that are part and parcel of sociology or economics or psychology or history for that part, which is more close to what lawyers do, I think. So you have to be able to recognize it. You have to be able to reliably, more or less reliably build on it. So that the consequences is that you deal with that, and that partly is an answer to you, of course. Yeah, go for an LLM. My advice would be first to go to find a scholarship if you want to study in the US, because otherwise you will be a poor man for the rest of your life. My second advice would be come to Tilburg. It's much cheaper and just as good. Besides the silly answers, the real answer, of course, yeah, what do you want? I mean, you have a legal background now, so you can read English, you can read the materials, you can debate in a properly legal manner with legal scholars and colleagues. But if you want to do your type of research, what was it again? I forgot now. Yeah, digital crimes. You might well go for a degree in artificial intelligence or a master degree. Or again, and I'm not joking now actually, come to Tilburg to the Law and Technology Institute, which is world famous. I think it's top worldwide, huge. And they have an LLM in Law and Technology, Interdisciplinary, that is. So my main point, of course, wherever you go, that's up to you. But my main point is that you have to try and master at least the sort of language those involved in artificial intelligence, in digitalization, and computer science are using. You have to be able to recognize it and deal with it. That's the least you can do. We cannot turn lawyers into full social scientists, I think, in just 1 year. That's impossible. We shouldn't have that ambition because you will fail. You have to do the statistics, you have to do the research methodologies in social science. You can spend a year on that, of course, but then you still have to need the theories. It takes you much more time than just that. What you at least should try and do is master somehow the language so that you find an ability to deal with the information that is coming from the other discipline.
And what program is good or not good for you depends on the content. So look at the content. So what are they offering? What are they not offering? So here the answer, as always in research, is so what do you really want? What are you looking for? What is your question actually? That is the answer. What is your research question with regard to education now in this regard? Yeah.
Okay, so I invite more questions from you guys. 1, 2, 3. Yep. And please introduce yourself.
Check. Good morning, Professor Maurice. I'm Gilanto Pengetahuan. So I'm sorry. In this occasion, I will speak Indonesia. So dalam kesempatan tadi, Prof. Maurice berkata bahwa ketika kita menganalisis hukum berdasarkan metode komparatif, lebih baik jika kita menggunakan interdisciplinary studies. Nah, kesulitan bagi saya juga yang mengambil penulisan hukum mengenai analisis komparatif adalah bagaimana caranya supaya kita ini tidak terjebak oleh aspek disiplin ilmu lain karena penelitian kita yang comparative law begitu. Terima kasih.
The question is that you mentioned about when we do a comparative law, you said that it is better to use interdisciplinary method when doing comparative law. The difficulties is that how that we're not being trapped by other discipline because of our limited knowledge in doing comparative law.
Next to Mas Baim, introduce yourself. Students in which semester? He's a lecturer.
Thank you, Bui. Good morning, Professor Adams. Thanks for your interesting presentation. I've got 2 questions. My name is Baim. I'm a lecturer in the Department of Constitutional Law. My question is about the generalization. Right, sometimes we found some papers, academic papers, written about, say about, like the law or constitutional law or human rights or freedom of expression in Southeast Asia, or maybe about some sort of legal decisions made by the court from these years to these years, and quite often they've made sort of generalizations, without going into the deep reality of the law, like why the law was made, what was the historical background, and so on. So my question is it possible to make a generalization, and what levels of generalization that should be tolerated in making a legal research in using comparative legal method or as a discipline? My second question is about when somebody's doing like a legal comparative research, is it also possible to make a judgment or sort of normative judgment? So for example, I'm a constitutional law lecturer. I'm going to make a research about how the judges in the Supreme Court of India were appointed, right? And how is it like in Indonesia? How is it done in Indonesia? And whether one of these systems is better, and maybe what we can learn from it, and maybe what we should change about our own legal system, or maybe what they should change about their own legal system. Is it possible to make that sort of normative judgment, or do you think that it would involve like ethnographic sort of research? Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Yeah, thank you, Mbak I. Good morning, Prof. Maurice. My name is Todi. I'm from Adat Law Department, Customary Law Department. I really appreciate your explanation on the level of interdisciplinarity in the legal approach, but I haven't heard about. Is that possible? Would it be possible the comparative legal approach used to compare the between normative orderings instead of law between the law of one state to the other states, but can we use the comparative approach to compare the, for example, religious law and state law, or international law and state law? Because sometimes in the legal pluralism point of view, there is some contradiction and also the similarities with between those normative orderings. I'm not going to see it as the same level of legal systems, but those pluralities exist. Can we use that this approach to understand that better? Thank you.
Yeah.
Please.
I will combine the second and the third question up to a certain extent. Is it possible to make generalization? Oh yeah, that's your neighbor, yes. Yes, thank you. Without going into the deep reality, you said, and what should be tolerated. Here again, the question is what are you looking for, basically. But that's not good enough as an answer, you know. I mean, that means everything is possible as long as you describe your research question in such a way that everything can be tolerated. Then it becomes almost meaningless, I would say. What I tell my students is actually, it tunes in with another aspect, is how do you organize your comparative studies? And basically, and very generally again, there are two ways. You either do it horizontally or, of course, vertically. Now, what is the difference? So, here is again the example of constitutional review. So, the organization of the court. Sorry, here's this again something dealing with constitutional review by the judiciary. I can't read my own handwritings actually. I hope you can. So here's the organization. Here's the competences. And here is how judges are appointed. So, your focus. And maybe another topic. And within this, you deal organization in India, if it makes sense, in Spain again, in Canada, let's skip the US today, and maybe South Africa. And this is what you repeat. And then you've got a kind of elaborate final chapter where all this should be somehow brought together. I tend to notice, I didn't check it empirically, but I tend to notice that these type of studies tend to stay at a level that is more on a general level. You know, and it's quite complicated to read actually here. I advise and then I come to your point, my students, I advise to start with a research question usually, and then an elaborate chapter about India, Spain, Canada, and South Africa, where all those elements are being combined. But within the context of a chapter, also the, as you called it, the deeper level, the deep reality. So a case study like this within one chapter makes it possible you to present this deep reality in a coherent manner. Otherwise, it will be scattered around and it becomes shallow. So this is a demanding thing. And then, of course, you've got a kind of concluding chapter again. The advantage of this approach, and there are scholars and colleagues who are actually advocating for this approach, I disagree with them. The advantage of this approach is that you show the material yourself. You're showing it to your reader. And if all is well, you also show why you made certain choices, what you are picking out, what you think to be important, and maybe even not important, which is also many times important to mention. I'm not dealing with this because, etc., etc. So for the deep reality, deep level comparative law, as my own supervisor once called it, is deep level comparative law, this is the best approach, I think. It's demanding, but for doctoral research, I would say, why not? Give it a try. And it makes it feasible even because, you know, you can, this is kind of more controlled. I'm working on Spain now, and I'm working now in Canada. I've got 6 months to do that, or a year or whatever. So this is, so my answer implicitly here is I think you should prefer, if you want to do the explanatory thing, stage 9, you need the deep reality. How to organize the deep reality, I would say through case studies. And of course, here the comparison comes in. Here you can explain for the similarities and the differences. Could it be normative? Personally, I do not think it's necessary to make these type of choices. It's not forbidden. I'm not against it, but I do not think it's necessary. Unless your aim, of course, is to improve your own legal system. And then the other legal systems are providing models. So comparative law as a mirror for your own legal system. But then you have the issue, the difficulty of legal transplants. Can I use what they are doing in India, in Indonesia? Well, possibly, but that's a normative judgment, of course. And then you need your deep level analysis, your deep reality analysis again. Make your choice. I tend to stick to part 9, explain for the realities and differences, and then the reader can do the thinking him or herself, whether he or she likes it or doesn't like it. Having said that, the order is extremely important. First, the description, I would say, try and understand what is going on in another legal system, let them speak for themselves, and then you could try and give it a go to say something normative about it, whether you like it or not. And then I'll come to your question. Can you compare two normative orders? Of course you can compare. You can compare, not just in terms of, even if the hierarchy is different, the legal hierarchy is different, but of course you can compare them. But especially with, in the examples you are giving, you need a kind of normative framework there. So you have to come up, you show your normative framework. So what do I think about public order requirements? So to what extent can religious norms infuse formal legal norms? What do you think about the relationship between the state and the sub-level, or the other level? Maybe that's a better word, actually. So you need theories of legal pluralism. But my answer would be sort of the same as your colleague. Yeah, I mean, you need a normative framework then. But if you got one, you can compare and you can come up with a conclusion. Under these conditions, religious law should have preference or not. Under other conditions, state law should have preference or not. That's a normative answer, actually. Another way of looking at this is what is going on as a matter of fact. You could say, well, there's a legal hierarchy and the state law is superior as far as the legal norms is concerned, but what is really happening in the end, then it becomes a really sociological study, of course. And compare, yeah. There was the first question. Yeah, the question, is it better to use interdisciplinarity? My point actually was, where was the one? Yeah. My point actually was, it's unavoidable. It's not just better. It's not a matter of better or worse. You can't avoid it. Even if you describe another legal system, you have to do something if you want to understand the rules, what they mean, simply what they mean. Describing the meaning of the rules makes it necessary to make the cultural assumptions, the implicit cultural assumptions explicit. And that is not a typically legal thing. So some sort of interdisciplinarity comes in, and the challenge of doing comparative legal research is exactly what you were describing. So you have to be aware of your cultural assumptions to avoid becoming trapped in your. It tunes in with the first question that was asked by your colleague who was sitting there, to avoid being trapped. So I think a lot of methodological debate doing comparative legal work is never neutral. It's about being aware of it. So being aware of it to avoid being trapped in your own cultural assumptions. You can be trapped in interdisciplinarity because you do not master the other discipline, of course. Well, that's a matter of studying and working hard. It doesn't mean you have to do the other work yourself, again, I repeat, but it means that you at least have to be able to deal with sociology, history, or whatever discipline you are building on.
Jadi saya simpulkan dulu ya perbincangan kita setelah presentasi, tapi jadi banyak pertanyaannya lebih bagaimana kiranya mempraktekkan ya comparative studies dengan yang menghubungkannya dengan pendekatan yang interdisiplin atau interdisipliner bahkan di dalam hukum dan bidang lain. Nah, jadi memang tadi penekanannya bahwa kalau kita melakukan comparative studies tentang satu hukum tertentu kan kita perlu tahu konteks hukum itu dibentuk bagaimana, supaya kita tidak melihatnya kemudian tidak kontekstual ya. Nah, itu yang menjadi penting juga. Jadi memang mau tidak bisa dihindari bahwa pendekatan dengan disiplin ilmu lain itu menjadi penting untuk mempertajam analisis kita terhadap ilmu hukum. Jadi nggak bisa hanya berdiri sendiri pada ilmu hukum itu ya. Itu memang itulah menjadi tantangan dari comparative studies, yaitu yang dibilang oleh Pak Maurice di awal bahwa dalam tantangannya cukup ada, tapi bukan berarti tidak bisa dilakukan. Itu tadi juga pertanyaan dari Pak Baim sama Mas Todi. Jadi bahwa komparatif hukum ini menjadi penting. Nah, apalagi tadi ya ada yang menyatakan kalau kita mau reformulasi hukum kita bisa menggunakan comparative study ini sebagai mirror, kaca untuk melihat sejauh mana sih hukum kita dibandingkan hukum lain. Ya, tapi memang tadi dibilang bahwa kita harus juga melihat ada cultural assumption-nya. Jadi ada asumsi-asumsi kultural di belakang hukum itu yang juga memang perlu kita lihat. Nah, ini memang pakai pinjam analisis lain. Dan saya kira kalau untuk Fakultas Hukum kita sudah belajar sosiologi hukum kan? Kita ada mata kuliah sosiologi hukum, kita ada mata kuliah politik hukum. Jadi itu sebetulnya alat untuk kita gunakan dalam menganalisis yang lain. So I actually in Faculty of Law for the kind of like obligations for them to have a legal theory, sociology of law, and then political of law. So this is kind of like kind of compulsory course as well. So I think this is very important for you mentioned before. If we do comparative studies, so we cannot only alone to look at this. It is possible for that one, but in somehow we can need to borrow others kind of a study as well, approach as well. Yeah. So yeah. Okay, yeah. Nah, so we still have about 10 minutes if you want to more inform about your university.
Yes.
Programs that you have, perhaps they are interested in. Why not? Yeah.
Law and technology.
One of it because it's very interesting.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Let me see.
So they also want to listen whether there is opportunity to have scholarship, is it?
Sure. Yeah, I did. So I'll be brief. this is the student center, study center on the ground floor of the law school in Tilburg. Just very briefly about the university, it's situated in the forest. Yeah, it is. It's situated in yeah, amongst the trees, as it were, and it's, oh yes, it's got okay, give it another try. It's got 6 schools, 6 faculties, of which the law school is one. Actually, it's a big law school. We've got some 3,900 or 4,000 students at this moment, which is pretty big, and also in Dutch terms. So this is the law school here in front, and this is it's a modern purpose-built campus, which has got all the facilities you need. I think we've got a brand new educational building with all digital possibilities, meeting rooms and whatever you can think of possible. That's one of the advantages of being a relatively young university. I think Tilburg is about 100 years old by now. Including the business school, some 20,000 students, of which there are 3,500 international students. The amount of international students in the law school is pretty big, because we have quite some English language master programs and a English language bachelor program, which is a so-called LLB, Bachelor of Laws in Global Law. So it's really an international environment with quite some of the lectures, I think some 30–40% even, depending on the department, coming not from the Netherlands but from elsewhere, all over the world, that is. So the law school was established in 1963, 300 staff, at this moment 8 departments. We are kind of reorganizing it. 6 bachelor programs and 11 master programs, of which 8 in English.
11 master program in law.
In law, yes. Yeah. We are doing quite well. It says here, this is information I think from, it's really a research-geared law school, and in the SSRN ranking we are doing really well. I have to be proud of this, of course, and I am, but we are really doing well. It says now the first of the non-American, which means that we are, I think, 7th or 8th in the SSRN ranking. You know this, the SSRN, you know, where you can download all these research papers, just in front of Chicago. Methodologically, I think there's some problems with the SSRN, but in any event, I think it's a fair guess to say that we're doing good. Whether we are 7, 8 worldwide or 20 worldwide, I mean, there are thousands of law schools worldwide. We're doing quite okay, I think. So, and we are investing hugely, not just in education, but also in research. Intensely, actually, by grouping, by creating team science, by stimulating team science, by working on interdisciplinarity and focusing on certain themes. Now, which are the themes that are important and which you find somehow back in the LLM programs too? That is, law and technology is a big program. I think at this moment 130 students registering each year. International business law, some 50 or 60 students. There is a student in an LLM program in international taxation, one in, we are developing now European law and international law. So we have some kind of focal points, and our research activities tend to come back in our master program. So law and digitalization and technology is a very important part. Rule of law questions. There's a master in public governance too. Rule of law questions are extremely important. So the public law perspective, if you like. So it comes back in all of our research programs actually, and also in most of our master programs. Here are some examples. There's a Master in Law, Labor Law and Social Polity, which attracts quite some Indonesian students, I understand, each year. We have an incoming group each year in the university of 35 students from Indonesia at this moment. Now, let me be quick. So here are the international master programs. So about the scholarships, are there scholarships available? Scholarships are being provided by tuition waivers. This is the way we deal with scholarships. So please go to the US, a good university, and even not necessarily a top university will cost you $60,000 to $70,000 a year on tuition fee. You didn't have any housing, didn't eat, didn't drive a car. So you should calculate some $100,000 for a year. Then you can end up at a very good university or a good teaching university, which is not top in terms of research. We work with tuition waivers for master students. That is, there is a tuition waiver fee of 25%, and I think it adds up to 10,875 euros tuition fee a year. What does it cost to live in the Netherlands for a year? I think that there's a Dutch colleague there. No, okay. German. A German, okay. You were nodding my German depiction then. What does it cost in Germany and the Netherlands? I think it's very comparable to live for a year as a student. So if you also want to do some traveling in the country, I would go for 10 or 12,000 euros for a full year, including flying up and down once to Indonesia. If you choose well, that can be for 700-800 euros, I think. But any event, so you should calculate at least 20,000 euros for years of study. I think it makes a difference with the US, so a significant one. This is as far as master programs is concerned. PhD programs do not tend to ask for a tuition fee. The financing of PhDs in the Netherlands is going through a different route. So universities are being financed by the Ministry of Education through PhD graduations. But it's a completely different structure which doesn't directly come back to the law school in this regard, but this is the reason why it is free. There are two recent Tilburg PhD graduates in the audience today. I'm not sure whether there are people interested in it, but I would advise you to talk to them after this meeting rather than me, or first talk to them and then talk to me. So most of you, I suppose, are interested in master programs.
They are interested in PhDs.
And PhDs too. Well, then I would briefly tell you something about it. PhD programs typically can be divided into internal PhD and external PhDs. Internal PhDs are those who have a government scholarship usually and being employed then subsequently by the university for a period of 3 or 4 years to do the PhD research and have some obligation to teaching and assist in the ongoing research of a group. Usually these are recent graduates, master graduates of any law school in the Netherlands or elsewhere. It's an international community in Tilburg too, so I think the minority is Dutch of PhD students and the majority is not coming from the Netherlands but from almost everywhere, including Indonesian students actually. Then there is, for what I would typically describe as more mature students, so that is experienced people like having some lecturing experience for a few years already, or other professional experience as Davi and Tita had. And these are the external PhDs. They typically tend to come for 2 months to Tilburg a year, then work in a kind of pressure cooker with their supervisors. There are always 2 supervisors on the topic they are working on, go back home again, back to their family, for example, or back to the professional position, and then work for sort of a year. Of course, there's in-between contact. Obviously, there can be, if necessary, but it's focused on 2 or 3 months a year. And what is interesting, my experience actually with those 2 external PhD candidates present here today in the public is, I can say so honestly, it's not because they are present, is very positive. They have to tell about their experience as PhD students themselves. I cannot do for them, but you finished in 5 years, I think. It was 5 and a little bit, 4 and 11 months, so sort of 5 years, nearly 5 years. I would say, and these are 2 good dissertations. I can also, I'm proud of them as supervisor, of course, but really perceived there were Indonesian examiners present too, and they were good dissertations, no doubt about them. Both of them, some sort of interdisciplinarity actually, of that sort. And it is possible in 5 years if you take time to work on the research question and the research design. I cannot say on forehand how long it takes, but I would say it's not uncommon to work on it for a year. Both of you actually, we worked longer on it. But once we had the research question and the accompanying research design, it was kind of steep hill. It went quick in a way, looking back. You never experienced it like that when doing it, of course, but looking back, I think that is a fair description of the state of affairs. So spend a lot of time on research design, thinking what you really want to know, what you are able to do. I mean, sort of in line with my story today, what you're able to do, what you're willing to do. And as long as you can spend 2 or 3 months a year in Tilburg and the research question is feasible, feasibility really is key as far as I am concerned. There are all kinds of fancy questions in the world, but you have to realize it's not the work of your life, although it feels so when you're doing it. It's a book you write for an exam with a limited, feasible, let's put it that way, research question. And then there's life after PhD where you can do the research, whichever you like to do, which follows up on that, or not follows up on your PhD dissertation. There you go.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Give applause for Pak Maurice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Pak Maurice, thank you for this lecture. So now we have to end the session. So Bu Wadek, would you mind to give some souvenir for Pak Maurice, please? Yeah.
Yes.
And then there is a souvenir for us.
Oh. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you for your attention. Okay, I've got a present for you too.
Okay,